first agenda item today is a fireside chat, right? With the moderator, Vikram, right here. So Vikram is a alumnus of IIT Madras. Right now he's CEO of RTI, think tank. Is that fair? Something like that? No?
I'm not involved.
Okay. I thought I was reading it. Yeah. Anyhow, so prior to that, he was SVP and CTO at Halliburton, and he graduated from IIT Madras and did a graduate work at Stanford. So the one thing that not many people might know was he was one of the original editors of Campus Times. So if you guys enjoyed Campus Times when you were a student, it's because of Vikram. So join me in welcoming Vikram, and he's going to have a conversation before.
Right. How to switch this on?
That works, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep this short. I'm just going to introduce, I'll tell you how this is going to work, and then I'm going to introduce Ashok. How it's going to work is that Ashok will speak for somewhere around 25 minutes. He'll give you his talk. And then I will ask him like a couple of questions, total time of 5-ish minutes. Okay? And then we'll have questions from the floor, and you will have to come. The mic will be set up somewhere, and you'll have to come and ask. And I might do some follow-up. But in the end, this has all got to stop in 45 minutes from the time we start, which was supposed to be 15, but it will not. The clock is there. So that's the format. And so without much more ado, I'll introduce Ashok. So Ashok Gadgil is a professor at UC Berkeley. The most distinctive feature is the National Hall of Inventors. I wrote that down. Inventors.
National Hall of Fame.
National Inventors Hall of Fame. And what's distinctive about that is that there aren't a whole lot of them, and many of them are dead. He's, of course, alive, and intends to keep that way for a while. And he's a member of the National Academy of Engineers, which is not shabby either. But the most distinctive feature for me in neither of those is his passion, his absolute passion for the 50% least advantaged people in the world today. And his work addresses that, and you will see and hear that passion when you hear him speak. So I'm done. Ashok, come on up, and I think you're going to probably go there, because I don't know how you're going to see it. Yeah.
I understand it, that's fine, but I need slides.
Hey,
Can I just request you to do that? Or sorry. Thank you so much, Karen. So I'm going to talk about the problem, of course, of the bottom 50%, and you'll see where this talk goes, and why we are in the place where we are. When I talk about a boiler room and when I talk about the Campus Bridge, I'm not just talking about us as individuals. I'm talking about us as a third world society in India. My daughters often ask me, are we still in the third world in India? And I have to say, yes, my kids. That's how it is for the last 60 years. So the question has deeper meaning than simply about individual glory or individual. So the World Bank defines the absolutely miserable, near destitute people as the absolute poor, and those are the people who make $1.90 per day in purchase power parity in 2015. Next. So where are these people? Where do they live? Next. There are only 5 countries in the world of nearly 200 countries that account for half of the absolutely near destitute population. And the top country in the list is India. This is where those people live. 24% of them live in India alone. Hard to read. That's the first largest line in orange on your right hand side. Next. So what's the big picture takeaway for solving the problems of these very poor people? Because the problems of the very poor are uniquely different than the problems of the first world. We are not talking about spillover technologies like the solar PV or 5G or retina biometrics, the kind of, or even iris biometrics, all of which were invented in the first world. Next. why are there so few new technology inventions that take root and solve their problem directly? Because often you can't solve them simply by trickle down, okay? You got to solve their desperate problems, not waiting for them to get to the point where they need your air conditioning. The question is much more desperate. Next. So I'll summarize one case study from my own experience, tell you my conclusions. And the background in this case, the history is a massive, successful campaign to get people to switch from surface water sources to hand pumps, to groundwater. 10 million hand pumps were installed in Bangladesh and comparable number in India because surface waters were contaminated with fecal matter because sanitation was inadequate. Hand pumps access groundwater. Groundwater was free, relatively, of fecal contamination. So the idea was they'll get out of cholera. Cholera was the big killer at that time, right? What happened was the top aquifer in Bangladesh and nearby parts of India was contaminated with naturally occurring arsenic. And arsenicosis, which leads to ulcers, gangrenes, and cancers, started appearing in the population from 1990s. And what you see here is cancers, amputations, even children, people with hands cut off and so on, and hands showing hyperkeratosis, which is one of the earliest signs of chronic exposure to high levels of arsenic. Even the girl is showing that level there, right, on the bottom on the right hand side. Next. So of course, access to safe drinking water is a fundamental human right, is part of the Sustainable Development Goal. Next. And yet, tens of millions of rural poor in India, close to 70 million, and comparable number in Bangladesh, have no other water to drink but groundwater, and that's contaminated with arsenic. Next. So arsenic is ubiquitous all over the Earth's surface. Okay? Problem is most severe, as you know, here, but also in Chile, parts of the US and Mexico. Next. Chronic exposure leads to all kinds of horrible diseases. And in 2002, the World Health Organization already called it the largest mass poisoning in human recorded history. Next. So let's start to look quantitatively at the problem first. Why should we bother about this? Apart from the fact that it's a problem unique to those who rely on hand pumps for drinking water and have no other water to drink, so you die of thirst or you die of cancer and gangrene and amputations. Next. So we are only going to look at one particular quantitative outcome, which is internal cancer. We are not going to look at cardiovascular disease, neuropathy, amputations, and other nasty stuff. So the first question is how 100,000 people, which is about the size of, say, city of Berkeley, if they drink water of a particular known carcinogen at its permitted level by the EPA. US EPA regulates carcinogens in water, and there is something called MCL, maximum contaminant concentration. How many cancers will it cause in 100,000 people over a lifetime of drinking that water if they drank that water with that particular carcinogen? You can rank order all of the known regulated carcinogens and create the next graph, please. So this is a graph of decreasing incidence of excess internal cancer over a period of time, over a lifetime. And the worst of them here is ethylene dibromide, which causes about 12 cancers in 100,000 people over a lifetime. And this is the last of them, which is dichloromethane, which is like maybe 0.1 cancer over 100,000 people over a lifetime. At its MCL. Okay? Now that graph has all regulated carcinogens in water at their MCL, excluding arsenic. Now I'm going to add arsenic in the next slide, but watch the vertical axis. Next slide, please. That's arsenic at its MCL. At its MCL of 10 parts per billion, arsenic will cause about 750 excess cancers, internal cancers, for 100,000 population over their lifetime. Next slide, please. And that was at 10 ppb, 10 parts per billion, which is allowed by US EPA. You might remember there was a big fight whether it should be 50 or 10, and finally it is 10. Okay? Next. Arsenic concentration that we have measured have ranged easily into 800 and 1200 ppm in both Bangladesh and in West Bengal, and also in Assam, and also in Jharkhand, also in Bihar, also in UP now. Next. So internal cancer risks rise linearly with arsenic concentration and the values that we are talking about. Next. So what happened? A bunch of NGOs, a bunch of corporates, a bunch of technocrats figured out how to remove arsenic because these solutions exist. They collected funds and they installed what are called arsenic removal units, ARUs. These are photographs from Murshidabad, the district right next to Bangladesh on the Indian side. And a student in Jadavpur University, Das, did his doctoral study in how these units are actually operated, what happens to them over their lifetime, and you will see sometimes they are used for tying cattle, sometimes kids are playing on them, sometimes they are used for tying that bakri, sometimes they are used to store grass on the top. So he wanted to know what is their failure mode, what is their survival mode, how long do they last? Next slide please. He found that more than 95% of them failed within 6 months of installation, within 1 year of installation. So West Bengal is littered with failed technologies in the field of the kind that you see there, and this was 2012. Situation hadn't changed much. Next slide. So closer inspection, the technologies were not at fault. It is the technologists that were at fault. They had failed because they had not put up a system that was sustainable in place. It's like taking a fancy car, a Lamborghini, and giving it to a villager in Rajasthan where there is no petrol pump within 500 kilometers, where there is no paved road, where there is no service station, where you can't reinflate the tires when they lose pressure. Okay? You don't have the infrastructure set up around to keep the technology running. Technologies don't operate in vacuum. Technologies operate in context of whole bunch of social and institutional and financial support setups which will make the technology functional. And they had not done that. They had just plunked something down that worked in the lab and hoped to God that it will work, and you bet it failed. It was a complete disaster, and the government tried it again and again, and hundreds of crores of rupees were thrown down the drain that. Next. So we started working on this problem back in 2005, saying let's design something that is sustainable and scalable. And the technology is called electrochemical arsenic remediation, and there's only a single slide to tell you how it works. We can talk about it in more detail if you want. But the idea is to have two steel plates immersed in the water, run a low voltage DC current, so anodically dissolve one of the steel plates, which creates Fe2 in the water. Fe2 oxidizes with dissolved oxygen, turns into Fe3, but it goes through a Fenton-like reaction, and the Fenton-like reaction goes through an unstable oxidizer stage of iron called Fe4, which is unstable. As it drops down to Fe3, it also oxidizes arsenic 3 to arsenic 5, and arsenic 5 is what is grabbed onto the Fe3 oxyhydroxide. Next slide. So Fe2, exactly same thing what I described. Next. And AS3 is much harder to catch, but if you oxidize it, it's easy to catch. Next. And then you grab it, you also grab the competitors, which is phosphates and silicates, and AS5, they all solve into HFO. Next slide, it coagulates, you remove them, you settle it out, clean water comes out. It all works fine in the beaker. Next slide. So works fine in the beaker in 2006 at Berkeley. Then in 2010 in Amirabad, which is a city in Murshidabad district, in a 100-liter device. Here is my then PhD student, worked on this device. It worked fine there as well. This was built in India. Next slide. Then we built a 600-liter size device in the Jadavpur University, 2012. That worked well. We took it out to high school, WW High School, and took over a couple of classrooms there in collaboration with the high school leadership. It worked well there. In 2016, there is a huge system now that occupies about the area of this room that delivers 10,000 liters per day to the students and teachers and staff free of cost in exchange for getting the classroom. and sells water to the community at 1 rupee a liter. Next slide, please. So we follow things in 3 parallel tracks: fundamental science, technology development, and education and outreach. Next slide. So the plant flow process, don't worry about it. Next. So these are the reactors, the one which you saw in the little beaker. Next. And this is the iron, interdigited iron plates which we dissolve. Next. This is a team, and you can see West Bengal Dabdapi is about as hot and muggy as Madras IIT is. You can see all the sweat on my shirt. So those are two reactors in the background. Next. And this is what the performance is over April 2016 to January 2017, where the initial arsenic concentration was 250 ppb on this time, and we were able to bring down the concentration and stabilize it to well below 3 ppb. Once the initial, this unstable part, you can see the concentration fluctuates. The very interesting stories about how things are screwing up, and we have to watch and fix it. But beyond that vertical line, which appears on 15th of September, water was made available to the right of that vertical line. Water is available for students, teachers, and staff for free, and for the community for 1 rupee per liter. Next slide. These are kids standing first day available to them, pick up the water with electronic debit cards, which they got, so we could keep track of how much water who was getting. Next slide. This is what is happening to the risk of the students, teachers, staff, and the community at 250 ppb. The risk now, because remember the linear scale, at 250 ppb the risk is 18,000 internal cancers per 100,000 people lifetime. Next. And this is what we deliver to them now for a price that they can afford. 66 rupees for 10 liters is 1 cent, not 1 rupee, 1 cent a liter. So 60 paise a liter is what they buy, the community buys. Okay? So again, what's the big picture? Why are we not able to deliver good technologies other than the spillover ones? Next. I think this is all about new technologies. And our assertion, based on almost a couple of decades of work like this, next, is in fact, there are 2 major failures why this doesn't happen. One is that we are trained good for going to the boiler room. We are deep and narrow, and we turn into craftsmen. The original word of the word engineer is not related to engines. Engines were invented much later than the English word in engineer. Comes from the word ingenuity, ingenious. People who solve real problems. Okay? It's not about running engines. You can run engines too, of course. But it's about ingenuity. Alright? And then secondly, there is quite inadequate appreciation and preparation for what it takes to solve a problem in the real world, outside of your narrow and deep discipline. Next. So this is the overall progression of technological maturity. And IBM takes the numbers 1 to 3 to 10 to talk about the ratio of research to development to first full-scale prototype. 1 to 3 to 10. And we never invest in the 10. We do just 1, and then we say, well, maybe we can do 3, and why the hell doesn't it get to the real world? Look at the blue line, look at how much the money sinks before it takes off and becomes profitable. And that's part of the reason why we have that bottleneck, that we don't invest in that deep dip. Next slide. So what we use, strategies we use to overcome that critical zone push, is work with is all non-engineering stuff, but only engineers have to do it too. You can't hand it off to a sociologist or an economist. Okay? Work with the community, make sure it's economic opportunity for community members, bridge the knowledge divide, and then ensure compliance with all local regulations and laws. Next. And this is just the delivery point. What is happening at the very end? You see on the top left, the hand-held debit card, the water debit card that all the kids have, students and teachers have. You see this kid showing it off very proudly. On the bottom, on the left-hand side, you see the water collection point, separate sites for boys and girls, because that's what the high school wanted. And we have to respect that. This is fine. And then you see the crowd here. The next. So I'll stop here. We have time for questions, and I kept it to my time limit.
You sure did.
Okay, I put my mic back on. I'm going to face you again. So, so the format again is that I'll ask him one or two questions, last two probably, and then we'll switch to you folks asking, and then we'll take it from there, and then we'll get it down. Okay.
Vikram, if I may make a note.
Yeah.
So we have a mic here for audience questions. Please, if you have a question or you're thinking about it, please make your way to the front while Vikram is doing his questions, and line up here so that it's convenient.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So in the 5 minutes or so that he and I chat, be thinking about either follow up on what we talked about or on what he said. So Ashok, so first of all, marvelous work, and the target is the most marvelous part, as I did my intro to you. Your passion is clear. I want to pick up on a couple of points. The key takeaway, so the arsenic removal is a terrific project, but you're saying that or anything else, in order to actually implement it, requires other things, and I made a note of a few of the other things. One of them interested me is the one about the knowledge divide. As you probably know, one of your colleagues at Berkeley, George Akerlof, won the Nobel Prize for Economics for what was called information asymmetry, which is that if there's an asymmetry between the giver and the receiver, then the receiver values it less and is less likely to adopt it. So I assume that you know George. He's a very approachable man, and so I assume you're using some of those techniques. I want to ask you, so I made notes on some of the things that you consider important to get it across. By the way, I love your boiler room analogy. I used to, for the same general concept, I like to say, if you build it, they won't necessarily come. This is Kevin Costner and Field of Dreams stuff, you know. And they won't necessarily come, you have to enable them to come. And that's basically what he's talking about. So the first question I have is that in the arsenic project per se, of those 4 precepts you put forward, actually let me put one of them forward, which is, let's take any of them, to design for acceptance by the community. Did you do anything special?
We had community outreach meetings, which were open mic meetings in the school. We persuaded, we like to call it a zipper approach. In other words, the Jadavpur University colleagues talked to the governing board of the school. I talked to the science teachers and the headmaster, who was also at one time a science teacher, former science teacher. They were excited about this. We talked to all teachers, we talked to all students, we had my students talk to their students. So in some way, at appropriate level, technology knowledge, science knowledge was always transferred between decision makers and stakeholders on the community side and from the people who thought they had a solution. And we had to not just communicate to them, we had to learn from them what is it that they cared for and incorporate that back into how the technology was designed, particularly the front end of it.
Okay, so let me build on that. Really, one of the aspects of the questions I was asking was, did you design for acceptance by the host community? But for example, when I led technology groups, the stuff we designed in the US did not necessarily apply in Canada because they wanted something which is more fit for purpose, as they call it, okay? Did you design it so, for example, it could be made in India or something? I mean, did you do something different on the design and construction of the thing?
Sure. For one thing, there is nothing in this technology that is built in the US. Every screw, every electrical connector, everything is built in India, whatever you saw. Okay? So Design and science came from the US for sure, but the engineering and construction was in India. What we could do in Calcutta, we did. What we couldn't, we built it in Mumbai with a fabricator and moved it to Calcutta, but it is local, point number one. Point number two, we had to over-design because the attention to detail in operations is much poorer in India. We should expect that, and that is exactly what happened. Which is why you see that earlier fluctuation of the arsenic level going up and down. That's because the operator turned one of her pumps off. He said, this pump makes too much noise for me to speak on my cell phone with my friends. So that was a recirculation pump. He said, the pump is doing nothing. It's taking the water and putting it back again. Why the hell that pump? So we didn't know what the hell was going wrong for the longest time, until one of my students befriended the operator and got out of him what was going on. He was turning the damn pump off, okay? And the recirculation pump, he thought it was useless, but there are things like that, so there is a lot of over-design involved. And we, of course, told the operator that if he messes with this again, we'll have to look for a different operator. So then things stabilized, and now we deliver at 3 ppb, which is good.
So at a broader level on that anecdote, on the broader level, more generic point is that there are certain societal norms that you have to understand, such as societal norms that he was conducting somehow, that you have to understand and inculcate into your launch. Okay.
Lots of examples like that.
Yeah, so I know I'm already not supposed to do this, but since I'm holding the mic, I'm allowed to do it. So an example of another that I'm aware of, where if you don't understand the societal norms, you probably can't make it work, is in cook stoves, which is chulas. They are one of the biggest killers in the world. About 4.3 million people annually die prematurely because of wood burning cook stoves. And I know he knows this because he works in it, but that's just why I threw it out. And the first examples of that that were introduced were simply not used because they didn't conform to societal norms. They didn't look like the chulas, and so forth. So these are non-trivial things. Okay, the technology might be perfectly fine, but you need to have absorbed into it. Okay, at this point, I will open. Nobody is. We have one. Okay, we'll open it up to the mics, and I reserve the right to go back and ask my own questions again.
Sudhir Krishna, I from Madras, BTech 76 Mechanical, also explorer in UC Berkeley.
Can you come to the mic closer?
Can you hear me?
It's not on.
Okay, Sudhir Krishna, I from Madras, BTech 1976 Mechanical, explorer Berkeley. But my question is this: you mentioned the problems affecting the bottom 50% in the world, and you named arsenic as the biggest example.
One example.
Yeah, so which leads me to my question. Can you name the next 2 or 3 big problems affecting the bottom 50 that needs the attention of the world that they're not getting?
Sure. Very good question. I would literally say that they don't have good housing, they don't have good drinking water. There is this whole problem of economic development as well. But I'm talking about simple needs of survival. And simple needs of survival are like what you would say is food, water, shelter. Those are not meant for these people. They live literally hand to mouth with no security, no even simplest healthcare. So anything that we can do to alleviate problems which takes them to the brink of life and death issues would make a huge difference to them, and they are literally not even on the horizon in the first place. But drinking water is for now, takes a lot of my attention as an example. Please.
Yeah, that's it's great like that with your presentation on arsenic. I'm glad that you kind of brought up between drinking water. In fact, my question is related to that, like essentially. No, in fact, we are working on certain unrelated problem, but about traffic congestion, but there is a relation in a way, like about infrastructure is a problem, but when we have first-hand experience how we can get strong and soft if we talk about anything about infrastructure or infrastructure components or in innovation on the infrastructure side. Like in fact, that's worldwide phenomenon, like even in the US, like because it's a public roads and all that, like so there can be quite a bit of resistance to innovation on that. And drinking water, yes, drinking water, we can kind of talk about it, but I mean, unless we also look at innovation that can actually make the supply of drinking water viable, like from a business standpoint, I mean, it's a big problem that to tackle, like, and it has to be a business model as well as a technology problem.
Yes.
Like, what's your opinion about tackling this holistically? Like, well, arsenic is one part of it. Like, there's a bigger problem that we need to tackle as well. Sure.
Very true, absolutely right. So just to close out on the business angle, one has to pay great attention to keeping the cost low, and that was one of the things to which we paid great attention. So this plant, the one which you saw in the picture, when it sells 10,000 liters a day for 20 days a month, the commercial operating the licensee makes about 1 lakh rupees a month profit net out of this. So it is actually not just charity for anybody. It is good for the people, it's good for the environment, and it's good for business. That's the way to scale up.
Thank you.
So before the next one, let me ask a quick follow-up on that. So one of the points that you made was that you should create local economic opportunity in what you do. So in this example, what did you do? This is what you're talking about. What are the things you did to create local commercial opportunity?
The local commercial opportunity comes in two different ways. One is, of course, the plant is built with local labor, everything is local, right? As far as possible, do it locally. To the extent not possible, do it maybe in Mumbai, higher technical skill workshops. More importantly, there is employment. And thirdly, in addition, the fact that people are now free of internal cancers and risk of amputations and risk of gangrenes and cardiovascular diseases actually gives them ability to not have to invest in their own healthcare so much. There is actually an economic analysis done by Professor Joyce Roy of what are the economic costs of having a cancer patient in a house who takes 10 years to die slowly, or gangrene that develops slowly, and amputations. And you have amputees in the house who are able-bodied, who still need to eat, but who are now a burden on the family economically. So there's a whole sort of load, financial load that takes off from the community by giving them health.
Excellent point. Just not beyond jobs, it's the whole economic value added of better health. Perfect.
I stepped up here because our next questioner is a gentleman that I would like to introduce before he asks the question. This is Pradeep Gupta. He is from the first batch that graduated IIT Madras. And to take on Mahesh's point about what are trailblazers and things that, people who set things for the rest of us. And also on Ashok's point about an engineer not necessarily working with engines and solving problems. Pradeep Gupta was the former mayor of South San Francisco, considered as the biotech capital of whatever part of the universe you want to consider. He's currently a council member, and he has a question for the speaker.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Appreciate it very much. And I wanted to thank Ashok for doing all the wonderful work you've been doing since I knew you in 1980s. You started on that path and you're still continuing it. Congratulations. My question is the following. I think your premise and your facts are so momentous because the numbers are just overwhelming. And the needs are immediate. It's not something we can wish. Given that we started with the level of destitute and absolute lowest level of economic spectrum, does it justify, and that's my question, does it justify charging 1 rupee per liter of water, which is critical commodity, from a population which is destitute? Why doesn't it get done by public services? We have so many other things going on. I have been in the public community service for a long time, and if I were running the city or the area, I wouldn't charge them 1 rupee, I would give them free.
That's a tough question to answer, because it involves the level of public integrity and level of caliber of people we get in public service, including in politics in India. While safe drinking water is a fundamental human right, once the elite in India and most developing countries have safe piped drinking water supply, they lose interest in delivering safe drinking water to the bottom of the pyramid in their own countries. It's pretty much like education. Once we are able to go to IITs and we have institutions of excellence, the push to have even elementary literacy in India has softened. Whereas, right, I mean, no country has gotten out of the poverty trap by leaving half of its population functionally illiterate. But we have to invest, exactly correctly said, invest in fundamental things that we ought to provide, so that a country like China becomes a factory for the world, only after they have 99% literacy, even with a lot of bloodshed, agreed, but they delivered something where the foundations were solid, not built on sand. In my case, I concluded that I cannot wait for the government to do this. The only movers and shakers of society are really businesses and industry and business models where everybody wins a little bit. So in this model, everybody wins a little bit. At least the school kids and the staff and the teachers get free water because the school gave us a couple of school rooms. But for the rest of the people, I think they are okay with buying 10 liters at 6 rupees, because for them it's like a cup of chai for a day, and they can afford it for now. But you're right, for the really destitute people, we need public help. Outside of my power, sir.
Yeah, we will talk about it later, thank you.
Okay, we have 3 minutes, folks, so pick your spots.
Last two.
Last two, okay.
Yeah, my name is Suresh Balasubramani, 76 Chemical Engineering. I want to make just 2 points. One, to Pradeep's point, if something's free, it's not worth it. That's the perception of a Murshidabadi individual. I mean, whether 1 rupee is right or 50 paise is right is another story. But if it's free, then I don't want. It doesn't have value. Number one. And number two, I think this is to address Sudeep's point. What are the other things other than arsenic? WHO calls it AWASH, adequate water, sanitation and hygiene, AWASH. So that kind of, and everything falls under that health ambit, but AWASH is what the WHO calls it, and that's what they address throughout the world. So I do want to make those points.
Sure, thank you.
So I'm Harish Kamath. I actually am a guest here and appreciate your wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for this work and this presentation, Mr. Gadgil. I appreciate that. My question builds on something you just mentioned a moment ago, actually, education. I thought it was very interesting that you put this site in a high school, and so made a very important, that connection to the education part of it. I think, as you mentioned, education is seen as a personal ticket to success, but I wonder if the community sees education, especially a community like that, which is very relatively, very poor, and is focused on basic necessities. Now, do they see education as something more valuable because it helps them provide a very basic need?
That's an excellent question. I think we are very, very fortunate in India that in our country, in India, our past culture, our institutions, our mythology, our entire, what we may call baggage of history, is to value knowledge and to value education in a way that is profoundly different than many less lucky countries where the fire to get education is not there. So in some sense, the future is brighter, I think, for India, because education indeed is the key to success, and without education you can't get there from where they are now. So we are just lucky, and there is tremendous interest in India at every level Even from the maid who comes to your house to wash your parts, will send her kid to school. That's phenomenal. I've seen it across the country. And the answer is a very strong yes. And I'm very happy with that.
Okay, we actually don't have it, but I'm going to give 1 minute for one last, yeah.
Please.
That was an excellent talk. I just have a little technical question here. So, when there is a lot of sludge being produced, precipitation happening, what do you do with that? Is there a chance of reduction of arsenic going back from 5 to 3? And also the electrochemical technologies also have a burden on electricity in these places. That's always a challenge, right? Energy requirements. So.
Good questions all. Let me answer them very quickly. The sludge production is indeed very small. 1 person per year water treatment causes a sludge production of 1/2 of 1 coffee cup, 250 grams annual. So the volume of sludge, the mass of sludge per person per year is very small. Second point, you are correct that we don't want the arsenic to be re-released back into the environment, but it is covalently bound. So it's very hard, it passes the US EPA PCLP test, for example. And so it is perfectly possible to throw it onto garbage, but we don't. We give it to chemical hazardous waste disposal because in India, that is the law. And we'll follow the law, and that is folded into the price of water. And the last question was about electricity. The plant is designed to be very energy efficient, all the way from the process. So the total consumption of electricity for 2,000 liters is 10 kilowatt hours, including everything, including lighting in the plant. And that is something that is locally available. And when you automate the plant, which you haven't done yet, you operate the plant at night when there is no electrical cuts. And then you basically treat the water when you have enough electricity and deliver the water by gravity when there is no electricity. So that's where we are going. Good question, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashok and Vikram. Can we give them a nice round of applause? So we're ending the morning keynote, and I'll hand it over to Kannan to introduce the next session.
All right, so that was really inspirational. So our next session is about IIT and research collaboration with industry globally. Can we have all the, once the chairs get set up, can we have all the panelists? The moderator for the session is Vasu Guruswamy, who is IIT Madras. Vasu is currently, he's got a really cool job. So he does venture investing for private equity. Is that kind of right? Did I get that right? With that few million managed. So and in Energy Deco, in fact, he spent a lot of years at
chair cutting anything? No, I don't think so. That one, that last chair you're getting? Very good. Nobody's head is cutting it, right? No.
Worldwide software services, all the software companies. And he has experience in technology and oil and gas industry, and he's into venture investing now. And he also has he's also very interested in incubation and startups and research, especially when they have societal impact.